Hello, this is Pat Lynch, and you are listening to the Career Pathways Podcast. Today, our special guest is Dr. Paul Bube, professor of religion. Actually, the W. Lewis McColgan professor of religion. So that's a mouthful that I butchered badly. Joining me, as always, before we get started talking with Paul, is our fabulous podcast team. Joining me is
Gavin Brunson.
All right, and need I say any more? The man making the magic behind the board. Who is it?
Producer Jayson.
You bet, producer Jayson, as always. And from several podcasts ago, I got to say it again, Jayson, you are my huckleberry. You'll have to watch that podcast to find out exactly what that means, and don't get creepy on me. It's all legit. It's PG. All right. With that, Paul, welcome to the podcast. Yes, we always start our podcast with just a general question about how to get to know you better, kind of where you're from, where you went to school, and kind of what path you took to get here to Lyon College.
How long does this podcast last?
Yeah, we got all the time. This is, yeah.
I grew up just outside of Louisville, Kentucky, in southern Indiana, a town called Clarksville. Went to high school in Louisville, Catholic boys' school that no longer exists. I went to college at University of Notre Dame, the other end of Indiana, and studied theology and philosophy there. Actually, I was thinking I was going to be a lawyer. I got in the wrong track. I was actually in the pre-med track instead of what I thought was pre-professional, which is what they called the pre-med track.
Yeah.
And chemistry convinced me that medicine was not in my future. And it also convinced me that maybe law wasn't either.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why the law went out the window, but it did. Actually, it was at that time Notre Dame did something that we used to do here, which is we were discouraged from proclaiming a major until the second semester of our sophomore year.
Right.
Of course, we had a lot of required classes to do, and that took pretty much the first and second year. And I was struggling. I was a first-generation student and struggling to try to figure out what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, I think I should probably take business classes because, I don't want my family to feel like they wasted their money. And so I took management and econ. That's the only two I could get into my first semester of my sophomore year. And I did really well in management. The guy loved me. In fact, I had the highest grade in the class, and it was the class I hated the most. But it actually pointed me in the direction I was really interested in, which is morality and the study of morality. I didn't realize that at the time.
Yeah.
But then I didn't know what to do. I was into the first semester and was talking to a friend of mine outside our dorm, and this guy who's a grad student comes up and he says, "What are you guys talking about?" So I gave my woes and sadness about what in the world am I going to do with my life. He says, "You know what? Somebody told me that I should pick my major like I'm going to die the day after I graduate. Because you can go into things like business or a lot of things after, but you're never going to be an undergraduate again."
Yeah.
And it was like somebody took a load off my shoulders, and I knew the classes that I loved. And so I declared a theology major. I was thinking about an English major, but I ended up with a second major in philosophy. I had the equivalent maybe of an English minor. So I found my way, and then I went, then I didn't have a job after I graduated. Didn't know where I was going to get a job, but I ended up getting hired at a Catholic school, my rival school in Louisville, and taught for 3 years there. And that was painful. The high point of it was I got asked the second year I was there if I would be assistant varsity soccer coach and the head JV soccer coach.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know anything about this. And he told me, well, I don't either. I used to coach football.
Yeah.
He said, but there's some good resources over in the public library. Now, this is before the internet or any of that stuff.
Right.
So I spent the summer reading books on soccer and watching tapes about Pele, who's probably the greatest soccer player of all time. And I kind of got the idea behind it, and I created my own offense and worked from that. And we, my second year, we won the JVs, won the title for the JVs. And I really wasn't doing much of the coaching for the varsity, but that was my highlight because that's where I got to really know the students as people.
Yeah,
and that was very different than the classroom for me. But I knew at that point I needed something else, so I decided to go to grad school, and I ended up at the University of Southern California. You might notice a theme there. Football was kind of my high school, we tied for the state championship in the days they didn't have overtime. And my sophomore year in Notre Dame, we won the national championship, beat...
Touchdown Jesus.
Absolutely. Went to the Sugar Bowl with my little brother, and we beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. That was a really close game. And then
Joe Montana?
Joe Montana was 2 years behind me.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, our quarterback was a nobody. I mean, he was good. I mean, he was a solid kid. It's funny because I remember we were sharing a ride one time. People that lived in Florida would go through Louisville. Yeah. And so I get on the ride board and I get a ride with the people going to Florida. And this guy who was on the starting team. I mean, he was the starting quarterback. Was in the car with me, or the bus. I guess it was more of a van. And we started talking, and I said, well, have you thought about going pro? And he said, I'm not even 6 foot tall. I'm not going to make it in the pros. And I thought, that's the smartest guy I've met on campus. Because I've taught at 2 liberal arts colleges, and I've had students that thought they could go pro in football. Yeah. Who were smaller than that quarterback. Right. Anyway, then when I went to USC, the second year I was there, we won the national title. Yep. So I love it, but I never brought any to the schools that I taught at. Yeah. There were no titles, so I felt kind of a failure.
I've heard
there.
that. People have been saying that.
Yeah. Well, I thought I was off the hook because when I came to Lyon, we were undefeated since like 1950. Yeah. Because they had stopped the football team, and then they brought the football team back, and
streak was broken.
Yeah.
So then USC, kind of, what was the next step? Did you teach there?
I did teach to pay my way there. Yeah. I was a teaching assistant for a guy in the religion program that usually had about 300 or 400 students every semester. He was kind of a phenomenon. Oh, yeah. And he was a great teacher, and I learned a lot from him. And then after that ran out, because I was only supposed to do it for 2 years, and then he had me extended 3 years because there wasn't going to be an overlap. He usually had 2 TAs. And then after I finished my 3rd year with him, I got a job as a writing instructor. All right. With the writing program. They had a huge freshman writing program. And I liked it a lot. This was the era, by the way, that the personal computer came in. And I just got really fascinated by all of that. And I learned how to basically run the computer lab. You may remember the days of WordStar.
Oh, yeah.
Where you had no graphics so you had to do italics and underlines through dot commands. Yeah, you had to memorize all these commands and stuff, and then you printed it to find out what it looked like. That was a huge waste of paper. Yeah, but I would help students with that, and I'd also help students write their compositions, show them where they needed to strengthen things, and taught an actual class on composition.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I liked that for the most part, but it wasn't in my field.
Mm-hmm.
When I was picking up adjunct teaching for for University of San Francisco. They had a satellite program in the area, and I worked 2 semesters, my last 2 semesters at USC for Long Beach State, Cal State Long Beach, which was a good job.
Yeah.
And I've helped 2 other people get jobs there since then.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so then you USC. Then when did you make a decision to get a PhD?
I had decided that when I went to USC.
Okay.
I went straight into a PhD program. I don't have a master's.
Oh, really?
Yeah, their program, they really wanted.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was supposed to get a master's, and the head of the department called me in a couple weeks into the first semester. And he says, "Do you want to get a PhD, or you want to just get a master's?" I said, "Well, I want to get a PhD, but don't I have to get a master's first?" He says, "No." Right. Because you in a sense you waste a year,
right?
And so what I could do if I decided I didn't want to finish the PhD, I could get to the part you take comprehensive exams before you write your dissertation. If you decided that you couldn't handle it, and a couple of people in different fields would do that, I could have just gone to the dean and said I want a master's degree. Right. And they would just convert it to a master's degree, and then I could go to a community college or something to teach. But I mean, I loved graduate student. Yeah. It was being a graduate student. I loved the studies. I think, although I think I spent 1 more year than I should have teaching high school. The fact of the matter is I was ready to be back in graduate school, and I took every bit of it. I mean, it's like it's like putting a chocolate cake on my table.
Yeah. What was your thesis on?
I wrote my dissertation on the ethics of John Cobb's process theology.
Okay.
Woo. Process theology. Yeah. Well, let me back up. Process theology is sometimes categorized as experiential theology. It's probably not the best term for it. It is more empirical than a lot of theologies are, right. Like the theology of Thomas Aquinas, who's the great theologian of the Middle Ages. His is not that empirical. It is somewhat empirical because he used Aristotle. But this was inspired in the 1930s by the work of a philosopher named Alfred North Whitehead, who had taught at Oxford and then went to Harvard. He and Bertrand Russell had written a book together at the beginning of their careers on mathematics, a book called Principia Mathematica, which I understand is now long out of date, but was a kind of groundbreaking work in the study of mathematics, because everybody thought, once you knew some basic math, you knew it all. And then they discovered other ways to think about math. But interestingly, those two end up becoming very influential philosophers. Bertrand Russell stayed in England, and he was very instrumental in a movement called analytic philosophy that is still dominant in America and in England. Whitehead worked closely with people like William James and Dewey and a guy named Peirce that are sometimes lumped in as pragmatist philosophers, and Whitehead actually states in his magnum opus that his work is an attempt to give a theoretical foundation for the work of people like William James and Dewey. So it's very technical. Yeah. But the basic ideas are, one is that God is ever changing. Now, another philosopher who's a little bit different than Whitehead, but influenced by him, and has been an influence on the same students, a guy named Charles Hartshorne. It basically says that the perfection of God is an ever-growing perfection. It's not a static perfection.
That seems to go counter to many religious beliefs that, there's, because then would they be saying you're all of a sudden starting to become like moral relativist in some ways in terms of the changing, or am I kind of interpreting that wrong?
It doesn't necessarily come to that, but the idea of God becoming ever more perfect is
God is perfect, is it?
Well, but you see, you're
definition?
working with a Platonic understanding of perfection.
All right.
And Plato understood perfection as a form that never changes.
Right.
And he understood change as a deficiency of being. And Whitehead kind of flips that on its head.
Right.
And it's also more biblical.
Right.
The Bible talks about God changing all the time. And the Bible wouldn't even make sense, really, if there wasn't change at the heart of who God is, because God's in a relationship with people, and a relationship is something where you grow together. Yeah. And what happened, though, is that the power of Greek philosophy, Aristotle and Plato in particular, really took root in Christianity, starting with Augustine, and I think really being fixed in place by Thomas Aquinas. And they understood God as an unchanging being, perfect and without need of anything.
Yeah, perfect is
perfect means you don't need anything, right?
No.
But that doesn't sound like the God of Genesis.
Yeah.
Or the God of the most of the Bible.
Yeah.
So that introduced me to a new way of thinking about God that made more sense for my experience as a Christian. What else would you add to that? The other aspect of process thought is everything has meaning to itself, even to the subatomic level. And everything's interrelated. What's happening in this room is, insulated as it is with the door closed, is still having an effect outside the room. Now, partly it's been helped along with, technology.
Sure.
But even if there wasn't technology, what's happening in this room, we walk out different people and we affect the world. I mean, everything interacts with everything else. And that has a powerful significance for understanding environmental ethics, which is an area of ethics that I'm particularly interested in.
And we can come back to that in just a moment, but one thing I wanted to just ask is, this being a podcast about careers, you are, here's a Lyon student majoring in religion. What career options are available? What advice would you give that a student that wants to major in religion?
Okay. And I deal with both religion and philosophy. I mean,
I was going to say RPH, but that's inside baseball.
We're a hybrid program.
Yes.
And Dr. Beck and I actually celebrate that. I mean, she's a person that grew up with a Methodist minister as a father. I grew up Catholic. I became a Methodist. She's now more in the Quaker tradition in her faith. And, faith is very important to both of us. But at the same time, we're realistic. We don't expect everybody to draw out of the tradition of faith the way that we do. I mean, I make it pretty obvious especially when I'm teaching Old Testament, New Testament, because I think that helps people understand why it's meaningful to others. But I also recognize that a person may just be interested in the philosophical aspects of this world, and for a variety of reasons, maybe because they got hurt in a church tradition, faith doesn't work for them, or they're spiritual but non-religious, which is a common response that you hear from people my kids' age, and I respect that. But to go back to the career question, if you are, in my case, Christian, certainly one of the paths I could have taken would have been to go into ministry. I never really felt a call for that. Right. In other words, I wasn't drawn to that. Now, some of that reflects the fact that I was Catholic until I went to graduate school. And so going to ministry for a Catholic usually meant celibacy. And that had no appeal to me whatsoever, at least not from the time I was about 12 and a half on.
Well, Joni's very happy for that.
I hope so. And I'm certainly happy for that. But it was not, and I also think, especially when I became Protestantized, which actually started in my undergraduate days in studying theology, that every area of our lives can be a ministry. And there's ways that we minister or serve other people with, and it can be with a career, it can be with something that you volunteer for, it can be in your local church. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can minister. Now, I didn't want to go the path of becoming a pastor. I love the intellectual aspects of theology and ethics too much. I have preached a few times. I'm not usually asked back. And I think that's probably...
Oh, you're being harsh. Yeah.
No, I'm serious. I've never been asked to come back to any place that I've preached. And I think it's because I just have difficulty in not working intellectually with it. And I can do that in a class. Right. So, I mean, teaching was something that appealed to me. I had a couple of teachers in my life that really had an impact on me. A lot of people, it's a person that's had an impact on you that sometimes gives you a sense of that's where I want to go with things. And so teaching is definitely a way you can go.
Yeah, one way. And then, I could see, even law,
well, I was going to say that in terms of students I've had, I've had several students that have gone into law. Biblical studies, you're studying text. And you're studying texts that are understood by a community as having authority. Well, that's what law is. You're studying text, the text of law, and if ultimately in America, the Constitution. And I think if I ever had become a lawyer, I would have gone into constitutional law. Because that's what really, those kind of basic, how do you interpret these things? I mean, that's the big debate going on with the Supreme Court. Every time they appoint a justice, what is their way of interpreting these documents?
Originalist or, more revisionist. Well, how do you approach the study of religion at the collegiate level? I mean, you're teaching Old Testament and New Testament, so you have students from all this entire wide range of
plus the ones that don't want to be there, but it's the only one that fit in their schedule, and they're graduating that year.
But how do you approach that?
Well, I mean, I make it real clear in my syllabus, which probably nobody reads. But I make it really clear that my goal is not to convert anybody, and it's not to subvert anybody. I'm not trying to undermine somebody's faith, and I'm not trying to make a person into a person of faith. I want them to understand how faith, you got to deal with faith if you're going to deal with the Bible, and try to understand how people would have looked at these documents and actually the tradition prior to those documents as something that helped them understand themselves, understand what I would call God or the divine or the ultimate, and that the power of these is that they continue to speak to us today. Now, the way I approach teaching those classes is in historical critical methodology. So I'm very interested in the historical context of the documents that we're working with. I'm very interested in the literary context. I look at these as documents that represent a community from an ancient time. They're actually, one of the things I like to point out, before there were these documents, there were people who told these stories.
Yeah.
And then they get recorded. But even when they got recorded, it was only so that people who had special place in the community could share those stories, with some continuity over time. And most people heard the Bible in their lives. I mean, up until Gutenberg's printing press, that's the way people encountered the Bible, was hearing it. And so now how does that change the way you hear a story?
Yeah.
So you take a story in the Old Testament that, is dry, and take it out of the book of Judges, for example, and you realize that if you're telling this story as a storyteller would, that the story can really, it can have plot twist. It can be a little bit edgy.
Oh, yeah.
There's some really great stories in the Old Testament, but they also can speak to us of ways that we understand ourselves and what's meaningful in our lives and what's worth pursuing.
Yeah. So Old Testament, New Testament, based around the teaching of Christianity, does.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the Old Testament, I try to approach it.
Okay.
From
through Judaism as well.
Yeah, I mean, we probably should rename the course Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah.
And so I try to place it in the context of the people who brought these documents together.
Mm-hmm.
And so that also means the Hebrew Bible is very similar to the Christian Bible, but the order of the books is different, and which tells you something about both Jews and Christians. For Christians, we start at the beginning with Genesis, and we move in New Testament to the end. Right? You got a linear understanding of time, and so there's a built-in notion that there should be progress. We should be moving more towards God. In the Jewish tradition, you start with the beginning. You start with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Same 5 books. But then it starts to, now you have a second grouping that are called the prophets.
Right.
The first grouping is called the Torah. And the prophets include everything from Judges and Joshua to Isaiah and Jeremiah. But now they're grouped together. So what does Joshua have to do with Isaiah? And so, then you realize they're looking at this differently than we do. We're seeing this as we try to place all these books in the order that leading up to the Messiah. Then we start with Christ and we go
BC,
to the end.
That's at Lyon, have we approached teaching other faiths from around the world?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We have 2 courses that deal with that. I teach a world religions class.
Okay.
John Becker was taking that class while he was here. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, and Dr. Beck came back full time.
Right.
She teaches world philosophies.
Right.
And so we kind of keep the division of labor there. Yeah. So she's dealing more with the philosophies of the writings of the great thinkers from around the world. I'm dealing more with the kind of the historical ritual aspects of these religions and some of their beliefs and practices. So that it's a different. Some students will take both classes, but it's a different emphasis.
Yeah. Gavin, did you take a RPH class while you're here?
Yes, sir. I took Intro to Ethics, and I also took I think World Philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay, so you took Dr. Beck twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was usually teaching Intro to Ethics.
Yeah.
In fact, I used my own textbook, and then I was on sabbatical last semester, and they needed that. You're probably a exercise science major.
No, third.
No. Oh, wow. Okay. You took it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But a lot of the people that take that class are exercise science because they require that for the distribution requirement, RPH.
But you mentioned ethics. And, we have a whole group of your students coming in to do podcasts around, ethical dilemmas. But how do you teach ethics? Because, I'm sure that, being a man of faith, is it something that you approach it through kind of a faith-based, or is there a more of a legalistic way? I mean, there's a lot of different ways.
All
above.
Yeah. The courseware that I use, I wrote the content for the courseware. A software company that first developed around archaeology realized they had something going, and then they started including other people. And I was actually thinking we need something like this, and then I discovered this company, and so I talked to them at a conference, and I told them what I was thinking about, and they said that would be fantastic. It never really took off that well, but I think there's other reasons for that. But I had taught ethics since I was a grad student, and my program was actually religious ethics. Mm-hmm. So that ethics was always a part of what I was studying. And so I was very well versed in philosophical ethics and religious ethics, primarily Christian ethics. So I was teaching out of good textbooks, but most of the textbooks that are introductory for ethics are written by modern American philosophers who really don't have much patience with religion. And I found that really odd, because most people that I know, religion usually has some impact on the way they think about right and wrong. Mm-hmm. And I thought, if they did deal with religion, they kind of created a straw man picture of religion. Right. And so they would, basically try to show how it's, how do you if you say you get your ethics from the Bible, well, different people interpret the Bible differently. Well, yeah, that's right. And the view of ethics usually taught in a philosophy book that's religious oriented is what's called divine command theory. Mm-hmm. And the notion is that God has commanded us to do certain things. Of course, the first problem is maybe God commanded you to do it, but I'm not in your religion.
Right.
So what is God commanding me to do?
Straight to hell.
Yeah. Well, probably both of us, because we're probably both wrong. Yeah. And, but that's a straw man thing, because even within a religious tradition, I mean, you get 10 Baptists together to talk about what the Bible says, and you're going to have 10 interpretations.
Right.
Even though they all feel like they're saying and interpreting just what's there.
But that's part of the Baptist faith, is your relationship to the God, your personal relationship with the gospel, versus like Catholicism, where this is what the Bible says, right?
Well, actually, I think the Baptists would disagree with you on that.
Sorry, Baptists.
And I think a lot of Catholics would disagree with you on that too.
Sorry, Catholics.
It's all much more nuanced. Yeah. And one of the things that I do is I introduce an approach to religious ethics that is informed in part by my own process theological background, but in part by a whole movement in Christian ethics, and it's covenant ethics.
Right.
And when you think about covenant ethics, you think about communities. You think about people who come together for a common purpose, a common identity, and who are committed to each other. So if you think about marriage as a covenant, and people actually have two views of marriage in our society, right? There's marriage as a contract, right, and marriage as a covenant. As a contract, what a contract does is you get two parties that have a common goal that agree to work with each other in order to get the goal. So what happens when you get the goal? The contract dissolves, right? And if somebody isn't acting exactly according to the contract, that's grounds for, ending the contract. And whereas a covenant is you have people who are, the goal is the relationships.
Yeah.
It's the community itself that is focused around God, at least in the Christian tradition, and in the Jewish tradition. And the Jews really brought this notion of covenant to light, but they also had commandments. But a lot of people don't read the commandments in the context of its covenant. And if you read in the context of its covenant, you realize that the commandments aren't so much like, neon signs up in the sky telling you that you're supposed to do this, this, and this. They are ways of guiding us as we work together to be a community of faith. And so the covenant relationship in a marriage, for example, is my commitment to my wife and my wife's commitment to me. In other words, what our goal is to be in a relationship. The relationship is the goal in a covenant, not some external thing. When it's an external thing, a relationship is transactional. Right? You exchange this for this. I mean, and look at the just whole industry of prenuptials. If you're going to go into law, that's you, especially if you're going to family law, right? You got to, what prenuptials are.
Marriage is a contract, so
And then that diminishes.
Yeah.
Because then when you hit hard times, right, then you look for a way out of the contract. But when you hit hard times in a covenant, you look at how can we work together to deal with the problems.
Now, speaking like as kind of someone who teaches religion and philosophy, Speaker Mike Johnson, he says that he, as far as the Constitution, he goes, I don't really need the Constitution. The Bible is my guide. How do you, what's he saying, and how do you interpret that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're really getting into some heavy stuff.
Let's do it.
I mean, he represents a movement in America today called Christian nationalism.
Right.
And I'm going to oversimplify, but I think Christian nationalism is an attempt to go back to something like what you had in Europe before a lot of people's left Europe to come to America. And that is you have a person who is directly under God, and then everybody else is under that person. In other words, a king, or an emperor, and I think that's sort of what people are hoping for. The irony is that a lot of people fled to this country from England, especially because that was the system they were under. The king was the head of the Church of England, still is technically. He's got all these duties he's got to do as king. Now, of course, kings don't have teeth anymore in England, but they are still supported, and people are really wrapped up in the notion of royalty.
Right.
And I think there's a kind of, a weird desire to go back to that.
Yeah.
I mean, as a Christian, I want to follow God.
Right.
And I especially want to follow God as God has been revealed in Christ. That story, that person, that life is what helps me understand God more than anything else. But I'm not interested in having a government that is somehow reflecting that. How could you? It didn't work the first time they tried it. So I don't think it's going to work if they try it again.
In parts of the world too. You look at Iran and
Theocracies tend to be self-destructive.
Let's go to a lighter subject, like morality. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, early on you were talking about business and morality,
Mhm.
and that you know when you and that's kind of got you on that path. How do you teach that at all? Because I know
I do teach a business and professional ethics class.
yeah, because I know that one of the required classes when I was in business school was just business
Business ethics,
ethics.
yeah.
And it was all case study.
Yeah.
What would you do if you knew this product? That this product's defective, and what would you do if you in an effort to improve profitability and share price, you were building an airplane that didn't go through the necessary safety
Yeah.
inspections before
You're
it
talking about
went in the
B.F.
air.
Goodrich.
Yeah, the
brakes.
tires or Boeing now, unfortunately, it was more of a cost cutting, profit optimization culture versus an engineering
Mhm.
culture, and the net result is now, unfortunately, you have a plane door blowing off in midair, and
Or you had in a space shuttle in launch, you had
yeah.
O-rings that were too cold to
Yeah.
seal up, and
So
yeah.
how do you what's your approach in terms of how to teach students that?
I always liked some theory.
Yeah.
And so a textbook I used for many years, but Prentice Hall ruined it, was written by a guy out of not Santa Cruz, maybe it was Santa Cruz, and I'm blanking on his name, but Manuel Velasquez.
Yeah.
He happened to be a Jesuit priest.
Okay.
Yeah, so those Jesuits are pretty smart folks.
Right.
But what he did is he would take a topic, and so it'd be like the consumer and business, and he would just kind of go through. Here are some of the basic issues that come up. Here are the principles that we introduced in the very beginning.
Right.
And what I always liked his approach. He said, really, eventually it would start off with 3, but he ended up with sort of 4 basic principles: utility,
Mm-hmm.
Rights, justice, and caring. And he asks, how those help us make decisions in these areas. And he made a lot of use of cases.
Right.
And his cases were so incredibly well researched. He is not, I don't know if he's still alive.
Yeah.
I got to meet him one time. And,
Wow.
he's just, I would have loved to have had a class with him. I mean, he's just a really nice guy, really smart guy. And it was important for him to help people think about the ethical issues that come up in business so that they can be the kind of business people they want to be.
Yeah.
Now, outside of class, I've also taught business ethics in some odd places, and one was the Rotary Club. I was asked when I was in Kansas.
Yeah. Okay.
I was asked to come and talk to the Rotarians, and that's. Have you ever been to a Rotary Club meeting? No, you haven't.
No.
That's a really interesting thing. You probably have.
I've
spoken at Rotary and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the Rotarians do some really wonderful things,
Right.
and as do a lot of other groups like that. But so I was asked to come and speak about ethics to this Rotary Club, and it was a big Rotary Club. It's the biggest one in the city, and back in Kansas. And so I did some research on the Rotary Club, and they have a four-way test, and this has been picked up by other people that kind of like claim it, like they came up with it. But the 4-way test, I realized it was started with a couple of businessmen, I think in Chicago, if I remember right, who they were really disturbed by people who were not good business people, good in the moral sense.
Right.
And they wanted to be ethical businessmen, and they were all men. And they came up with this 4-way test, and I'm sorry I don't have it memorized. But so I talked about, I'd actually written this up because I'm not naturally a public speaker.
Right.
And, I couldn't give them an assignment to read before I came in. So I had written this out, and it turned out that a lot of people were pretty excited about it because they didn't know their own history. And they didn't realize that Rotary began out of a desire to be more morally responsible, that they knew that their business had an impact on their community and that it made a difference in their community. And they wanted to be a good role model and have a good impact in the community. And so they came up with that 4-way test. And so I talked about all that. And I got contacted by the Rotary magazine. And
Okay.
and they asked me to send in what they had, and they ended up writing an article about it. I have it somewhere.
Yeah.
But you know, there a lot of people don't realize ethics has been part of business in America from the get-go,
Mm-hmm.
and not in the sense that just because business people sometimes did bad things, which yeah, I mean they still do, but in the sense that there were a lot of people that when they started their businesses, they wanted to help their communities.
Yeah.
And now, of course, with corporations that are multinational, it's hard to do that because you usually have a board of directors that are more interested in getting profits than they are about having a positive impact.
Sure. And, that kind of, if you go back that, there's this morality that it's like the business and especially corporations almost become amoral
Mm-hmm.
in a way, because even the robber barons from 100 years ago had a sense of community and, things that, they were there. They were a key. They saw that
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't exist now. Now it's the shareholder is king,
Mm-hmm.
profit is what we are here to deliver, and we don't have you might do things around community more for marketing purposes, but it's, if your business takes a downturn, there goes 10,000 employees. If,
Mm-hmm.
we have to do whatever we have to do, we create a social media that, creates depression among teen girls, but guess what? We're billionaires as a result. Thumbs up. And so it's almost that amorality has crept into business.
Yeah, and the irony is that legally they're considered persons.
Yeah.
Corporations are considered persons.
Yeah.
So they have all the rights and privileges that an actual person has in society.
Right.
Not always the same responsibilities, but
Right.
they yet they really are not driven necessarily by morality. Now, of course, who's the famous economist out of Chicago?
Milton Friedman. Yeah.
Milton Friedman said the ethical purpose of a business is to make money for its shareholders.
Yeah.
That's the only ethical purpose. And he has an interesting argument there, but it's an argument that is ahistorical as well as amoral, I think. And I got the impression from reading something recently that he kind of backpedaled a little bit on that.
Well, because taking it to the extreme, and he, I think, was also had a lot of libertarian type of views, and it's no surprise, especially when you see like say Silicon Valley and the billionaire class. It's surprising how they all become libertarians.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, Musk is probably the best example.
Yeah.
But it is a total. It's not really a libertarianism. It's a egoism.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's very much a self-interest driven thing.
Right. Yeah.
Now he argues that out of doing the things that are in his self-interest are helping society.
Yeah.
Of course, his shareholders lately don't think that that's working so well.
Yeah.
But that's the problem with a corporation. I mean, Musk has to deal with a board of directors, and he doesn't do very well with them. And that's why he tried to buy out all of Twitter.
Yeah.
And Twitter hasn't been doing that well under his leadership either. But that amoral thing ends up hurting a lot of people. And like I said, it really isn't in the history. You think about Andrew Carnegie.
Right.
Here's a guy who was the big oil baron.
Right.
And, you know, was exploitative.
Oh, yeah.
And he woke up one day and he realized that he had been a jerk for most of his business life. And then he decides that he's going to take his wealth and he poured it all into peace building.
Right.
During my sabbatical, one of the things I was studying was peace building in Europe, and went to his palace in The Hague in Netherlands. You can't go in because that's where they're holding international trials.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know, everything from treaties to war criminals. And but they had this incredible museum about him. And it was funny because somebody had painted or drawn a picture of him with a halo.
Yeah, little.
But that was St. Andrew, you know, and that was the Carnegie after he had made his millions. But I think, or billions probably. I think his conscience finally came back and you know, challenged him. And he wasn't the only one that was like that.
Well, a lot of them, they'll discover philanthropy. So even modern day Bill Gates, you know, he was.
Well, I think that was his wife.
Yeah. Well, okay.
I think it's Melinda that really.
Sorry, Melinda.
Yeah.
Okay. So but you know, he was a rapacious capitalist, and then just then when he stepped back, you know, now they're doing just just all this amazing stuff.
Oh, libraries was the other thing that Carnegie did.
Yeah, the faith and religion today. What's your broad question? What's your assessment of where faith is, and just say in America?
You can come at that from a couple of different angles.
Sure.
I mean, from the standpoint of the role of Christian denominations, I think it's lost a lot of its influence, and it's rightfully lost it because of bad example. I was telling some of my students the other day that I once did a study in graduate school. It was a sociology religion class, and I did a study on the Moonies. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
The Moonies. The Moonies were a group that everybody thought was brainwashing young people, especially young college kids. And you'd have to, you know, parents would go and hire somebody to deprogram them. And so I was curious. They had a pretty significant presence at University of Southern California. And so I decided I'd study them. I wanted to find out why people did join them. Right. And I got kind of scared because I went on one of their retreats. I was afraid that maybe... Yeah,
you wouldn't come back.
Yeah, I mean, I gave all kinds of information to friends of mine. Make sure, you know, come and rescue me. And it was actually a very nice retreat. Nobody there was being pressured. They claimed that the food would kind of mess up your head because it was imbalanced in some nutritional way. And I mean, you know, really struggling. The food was fine. I mean, it wasn't what I would make, but it was fine. But what I noticed is, and I interviewed some of these folks, what I noticed is they had a gift for making people who were the oddballs in their peer groups, making them feel comfortable and cared for.
Right.
So and what stood out in my mind is one example is they were playing volleyball. And I'm not a particularly good athlete.
Right.
And so I know what it's like to be the last one picked. And, you know, which makes it harder to be motivated to even try. And this guy was really awkward. He was a freshman at USC. He was really, really awkward. And you just kind of felt bad for him watching him. But they were so patient with him. And they would try to help him, and encouraging him. And he wasn't feeling like, I'm a lousy athlete. He was feeling like that somebody was trying to help him become a better athlete. And he got better. Over just a few minutes that I was watching, he was getting better. And you could tell he felt cared for. Churches don't do that much anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, some do. I feel like our church does that fairly often and in some good ways. But for so many people, they walk into church and the first thing they see, and I got this a lot from interviews that I had with people that were either thinking about becoming Moonies or who had become Moonies, and that was the hypocrisy they saw in their church.
Wow.
They walk into church and they would see the terrible treatment that some members of the church or visitors to the church would get.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's true.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, today I would say the group as a whole that has met the most rejection are gays.
Yeah.
And they come into church and they're not accepted.
Right.
God doesn't love them, literally.
Right.
I mean, you know, you had that one church in Kansas, in Topeka. I can't remember the name of the head of it anymore. He's dead. His son, who has the same name, is now in charge.
Yeah, they would go to like funerals and memorial services and protest
especially
out front.
AIDS patients and stuff.
Yeah, horrific.
Yeah, they came to our community a couple times, and they'd have signs up, "God hates fags."
Yeah,
and you know, they'd shout and they'd yell, you know, verses out of context from the Bible.
Right.
And you know, when you're raised being told that and it isn't, you don't have to be gay, right? Kids that are my kids' age and your all's ages, you know, you look at that and you go, that's not right.
Right.
That's, you know, to tell people that God hates them is just wrong.
Yeah.
And isn't the church supposed to be the place where you know that you're loved?
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of our biggest problems.
But people, my belief is people want faith. Everybody wants faith in their life.
Spirituality.
Spirituality. Yes.
Yeah.
So where do they go?
Well, I think there's some interesting things that are happening there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's small groups of people that, you know, are finding each other.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily become organized into a church, but they support each other.
Okay.
And they're willing to talk about the things that are spiritual to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think, too, a pattern that's happened for many years in this country is you start having your own kids.
Yeah.
And you start thinking, I want them to have some kind of foundation.
Right.
And where did I find that? Well, maybe it was church.
Right.
But of course, finding that church is a little bit harder than maybe it was when I was a kid.
Sure.
But there's also the atheists out there who are forming their own churches. There are a number of atheist churches.
Is it what? That seems
a religion. That's the point. I mean, isn't the point is that we have a religion that completely not denounces, but it's a religion in itself.
Yeah.
It's just a religion.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. How it'd be a religion of no religion?
It's a religion of not belief. Is the act of not believing of higher power.
Well, yeah. I mean, although I think there is a kind of spirituality there. I mean, they actually have rituals and they sing hymns. But the hymns are, you know, maybe very secular hymns about the beauty of the earth, about friendship, about caring for each other. I mean, in other words, it's mainly focused around the moral aspects of spirituality.
Yeah. They believe they have a moral code, and they
you see, I was told that if you were atheist, you wouldn't have a moral code.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I mean, weren't you told that?
I just thought that well, Gavin,
I was gonna say, like, based on that, like, how do you think, like, with that, you saying no moral code, and then the rise of the atheists? I won't say rise, but atheists gain their own church. How do you think, like, technology plays in the fact of that? Like, do you think technology helps that because it's like getting to a bigger audience and you're able to like spread what you believe and it's more accepted now? That's possible. I never really thought about that before. I mean, it's possible that you can link up easier, and you might be on Facebook and
somebody says, I went to an atheist church,
Mhm.
and you go, I'm an atheist, but I kind of miss singing songs with other people, and they go and they check it out. I don't know if that's what's happening, but it is happening, and I think there's a real concern about being moral. I mean, most people I know that are atheist, most people I know are agnostic.
Yeah.
I mean, I always prided myself. I went through a period of my life where I was agnostic. I was not going to be an atheist because, as he was saying a minute ago, that's kind of a faith in itself.
Yeah.
And I didn't have enough faith to be an atheist. But I could say I don't know.
Right.
I honestly felt like I just didn't know. But what drove me there was the evil done to good people that I saw. And in this case, it was in a community I had joined when I went to college.
Mm-hmm.
And but it might be the loss of a little brother or sister, a meaningless death, especially at the hands of somebody who could, just as cruel.
Yeah.
Those things, challenge us in how could God be good?
Yeah.
And yet, allow these kinds of things to happen, which is a big question that process theology deals with.
Right.
And process theology says, well, maybe God is all good, but not all powerful.
Right.
And that was a big shock for me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people it's easier for them to believe that God is all powerful and not good. A famous survivor of the Holocaust, Elie Wiesel, he was an agnostic. I don't think he was an atheist, but he was an agnostic after what he saw in the concentration camps, including watching his father die and kids his own age dying. He couldn't understand how God could be all powerful and allow this to happen. So he decided that God wasn't all good.
Yeah.
A rabbi named Harold Kushner came to that conclusion.
Right.
No, that's not entirely true. That's not quite Kushner's view. He's more of a process thinker, even though that wasn't where he came from.
Mm-hmm.
But process thought would say, look, God is all good. But, what is goodness? Goodness is not something that imposes itself on others.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't coerce people into relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of love is scary, right? That's stalking love.
Right.
And that's not really love. That's power.
Right.
But love allows you freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you respect. And if God is pure love,
Mm-hmm.
God can't be all powerful the way we think of, like Superman or Thor, or whoever your favorite superhero is.
Right.
That's not the kind of power God has.
Yeah. Fascinating. The faith in America seems to also be moving more towards like non-denominational churches, and like I know, like coming from Atlanta, North Point Community Church, Andy Stanley. It's kind of the Atlanta version of Joel Osteen, but it's a church where you don't get married, you don't meet the minister, you don't meet the pastor. I mean, Andy's basically a professional speaker, incredibly powerful speaker. But they on Christmas Day they tell you stay home with your family, enjoy time. In it's real simple. His explanation is that we are church for non-church people. So, and that message really, really, stuck. I'm conservatively 20, 30,000, I'm
members of the congregation.
Yeah, I was going to say parishioners, but no, it's
congregations.
Congregationist, and so there's something there, and I think you see that Saddleback, Joel Osteen. What's your viewpoint on as far as this continued rise in popularity of non-denominational faiths.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that when I lived in Southern California. I lived out there about 9 years, and went to some of those churches.
Yeah.
And what they are non-denomination denominations. You'll notice they start having the same names.
Yeah.
And their top speakers will travel a circuit. The only thing they haven't done, although I think actually one of them might have done it, is create a seminary.
Mm-hmm.
But the church up here on Main Street.
In the old movie theater.
Yeah. What's the name of that church? I'm blanking.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it.
I know where it's at. I just don't know.
Well, there.
Yeah.
Well, there's a church of the same name down in Little Rock.
Right.
I think there's one in Conway.
Okay.
I mean, they all have the same name.
Sure.
And it's a name that's, kind of avoids the typical Christian names for churches.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seek out people from a particular seminary.
Right.
But they are in a sense a denomination in the making.
Right.
Well,
and I remember with North Point, there was a traditionalist. They'd look down on it. I know, they were just a few miles from St. Bridget, where I went, but we would send people there to kind of see what this.
Spies.
Yeah, well, no, but yes, but what's really going on there? Because
try to understand it.
Yeah, because it would be kind of more of a way of life, inspiration. He'd tie it always to something in Scripture to kind of have it be Bible based, and the real surprising thing is that it was like kind of the, what happened Sunday, but what they worked on was a big thing around small groups, and they'd always say like circles are better than rows, and so then they created all these small groups all over Metro Atlanta, and so it's almost there was like a ministry done at a much smaller, in the living room of someone's home.
That's the typical formula of these giant churches.
Yeah.
The mega churches. I had a sister that she and her family belonged to the second largest church in the country in Louisville, and went to church with her a couple of times. And they had a bookstore where you could buy stuff with their names on it.
Yeah.
And religious literature. They had an escalator. I never saw an escalator at church before. That kind of freaked me out.
Oh yeah.
They had a coffee shop.
Oh yeah.
The church they had their. I went to the service. That was the first one in their new sanctuary. They had just finished building. They weren't quite done, but I think they were going to put in cup holders. Which, actually, a cup of coffee during a sermon is not a bad thing. But
I'm not going to say it because I'll get struck down.
Yeah.
Lightning bolts will go.
Well, at our church, we have what we call a contemporary service at 9:00, and you sit at most of the people are sitting at tables. Same tables that they use the day before Saturday mornings for feeding people in the for free breakfast. And there's usually some donuts or fruit or stuff like that, and coffee. And I have brought my own coffee because church coffee tastes terrible. But I brought my own coffee many times, especially if I'm tired and I want to be at my best to listen because we got a great pastor and who's really good at with her sermons. But I find that very nice. I like the music's nice. It's upbeat. we used to go to a very traditional service, but honestly, the main reason why we did is because it was the earliest service we could go to.
Right.
And I don't like going to church at 11 o'clock and you're getting out in the afternoon and half your day's gone.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of selfish, but, I'd rather start my day with church
Sure.
than interrupt my day with church.
Yeah, that's right. Well, if we covered about everything, except one thing,
One
yes.
more. I got
Yeah,
one more.
yeah.
This has been itching
You've been
my
pretty
brain.
quiet.
This has
Yeah.
been itching my brain since I started the RPH courses.
Uh-huh.
So Dr. Beck, she asked us, she was to go around the class and we could raise our hand if we wanted to, what religion like we claimed and why.
Mm-hmm.
And no one said it, but Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she would always say, is Buddhism a religion or a way of life?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you, what is your viewpoint on it? Because Buddhism does have gods. They don't worship gods, but they have deities. So sort of somewhat, you see what I'm saying? So is it?
But did either Dr. Taranga or Dr. Arosha come to your class?
No.
Okay. That's too bad. He came to our class when we got to Buddhism.
Okay.
He would say he doesn't believe in God,
Mm-hmm.
that God's not important. He believes in the teachings of the Buddha,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what he lives his life by. So you could say that's a philosophy, but it's more than a philosophy because, he certainly practices rituals associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
He's very enthusiastic about it. He's always, anybody who wants to go to his temple, he's happy to take. And I think a number of students have gone with him and his wife to temple. We've gone a couple of times with him. I think Buddhism is very attractive. You can call it a way of life. You can call it a religion. I think either one is appropriate. People, unfortunately project onto religion whatever they had as a religion. And if they don't like what they had as a religion, then it's a negative projection. If they do, then, it depends what the religion teaches. I was always told people in other religions were going to go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And then that includes the Protestants. There's a point where I started saying, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And the Catholic Church around that same time started kind of changing that view a little bit. And they weren't condemning all, not even non-Christian religions anymore. And I think that's a really powerful step forward in the Catholic Church. But Catholic means universal. And if they're really going to be Catholic, then they really need to be.
Please, everyone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but, unfortunately, it's funny. I grew up Catholic and I went to a parochial school. The word Catholic and parochial are opposites. So that, that's kind of representative of, I think, a dichotomy that's in a lot of Christian religions. But Christianity tends to be exclusivist. And so sometimes I think we feel better if we're the ones that are going to heaven and other people aren't.
Right.
I don't understand why all of these things can't be true in their own ways. Now, my way, I find Christ to be really central to how I relate to God.
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect everybody to have the same thing. I think, you can be a Buddhist and not relate to God, but relate to, compassionate life. And Buddhism's beautiful in what it has to say about compassion. And it tends to actually live it out in many cases, but in other cases it doesn't. Buddhists are people too. And we all have our flaws. None of us live up to our best selves. And if there's anything good in religion, it should help us to try to live up to our best selves. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
So there you have it. So, signing off.
Gavin Brunson.
Producer Jayson.
And this is Pat Lynch. Thank you for listening to the Career Pathways podcast. We hope to see you next week. Thank you, Paul, too.
Thank you.
All right.
This broadcast is sponsored in part by Lyon College and by KILT Studios.